get off. So I went back to the school, had a fight with the vice president of the school, and he said, yeah, you have to do whatever these guys tell you to do. And I can't help it. Whatever they tell me to do to you, I have to listen to them because they give us a lot of money. So I left school early that day, and it was like snowing and raining out. And I came home and I wanted to get my mind off of this whole thing. So I said, oh, I'll work on my math homework for a while. That'll make me forget about it. Now, for those of you who have done differential equations by hand, you know how they will tend to make you forget things? Like you'll start working on them at 5 in the afternoon, and the next thing you know, the sun's coming up the next day. But you know what? It's real frustrating because they only give you the answers to the even-numbered problems in the back of the book, so you never knew if you did them right. So anyway, I turned on the radio for some more background noise. And back in those days, people had AM radios. And the host of the show came on, Gil Gross, with CBS AM. And he reads the news, and he says, about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. And the book says that John Wilkes Booth was never caught after he assassinated Lincoln, that he really escaped and made his way to England and then to India. But it says that on his way to England, he stopped off at this tunnel under Atlantic Avenue and hid his diary pages. So the missing pages of John Wilkes Booth's diary are hidden in this tunnel under Atlantic Avenue. And nobody can find this tunnel, so they can't find the diary pages. Then they say, oh, by the way, there's an old steam engine from the 1830s laying on its side next to John Wilkes Booth's diary pages. So I was like, what? A conspiracy theory about Lincoln and an old train? Where do I sign up? So I called up the radio station and I talked to Gil Gross. And I said, hey, what's up with this tunnel under Atlantic Avenue? And he says to me, oh, I don't know anything about it. It just came over the teletype and I just read it. So then he says to me, wait a minute. At the bottom of the teletype, it says the author of the book is G.J.A. O'Toole, and it gives his phone number in Connecticut. Why don't you give him a call? So I said, okay, that's a good idea. So I call up G.J.A. O'Toole, and I'm like, hey, what's up with this tunnel under Atlantic Avenue? And first he goes, what tunnel? I don't know what you're talking about. Then he hems and haws. And I said to him, well, the tunnel that you talk about in your book, you know, there's 25 pages on it. So he goes, oh, that tunnel. So I'm like, how do you get inside? Is it there? And he says, oh, I don't know. I don't know anything about it. So I said, how could you not know anything about it? You put it in your book. So he says to me, well, when I was young, I read in the New York Times that Murder Incorporated was dumping dead bodies down there, so I thought it would be interesting to put in my book. So now recently, in the past year, I found out that maybe this guy wasn't straight up with me, because he died about a year ago, and then his publisher's website, W.W. Norton, put up some stuff about him, and it says his day job was that he worked for the CIA in charge of special problem solutions, and that he was the resident expert of the CIA for Civil War espionage. So there might be something to this story after all, and the story about John Wilkes Booth getting away goes back all the way back to 1865. In fact, Henry Ford actually bought the mummified remains of somebody from India, and it was claimed that that mummy was John Wilkes Booth's body. So for a while, Henry Ford had this mummy on display. I don't know where it is now, but he actually fell for it and bought the mummy. So what happened was, G.J. O'Toole says to me, you know, I don't know anything about this tunnel. You know, you're a young guy. Why don't you go and see if you can find it yourself? So I said, yeah, I can do that. So this whole thing here is his fault. That's why we're here today. So coming up with Pratt, I had 6 weeks of winter recess. So I said to myself, all right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to go back to Pratt this spring. I'm going to go and research this tunnel instead to keep me busy. And if this thing with Pratt and Kodak blows over by next fall, then I'll go back to Pratt. So instead of going back to Pratt, I went to the big library at 5th Avenue and 42nd Street to the map department, and I began looking up old maps. So I went and pulled out recent maps, obviously, and there's nothing here. So I went back to the 1850s and then showed the Long Island Railroad coming down Atlantic Avenue. The tracks disappear at Borum Place and show up again at Columbia Street, and then run onto a pier. So I said, okay, so there was a tunnel. Well, why was it built, and how do you get inside? Is it still there? No one knows. So one of the librarians said to me, hey, you know, we have all the old newspapers printed in Brooklyn from the 1830s up until now on microfilm. Why don't you go pick through them and see if there's something there about your tunnels? So I said, okay, that's a good idea. Now keep in mind that looking for old stuff back in those days was not like going on Google Books, okay? Back in those days, you had to actually be handed a physical reel of microfilm, and you had to put it in this big clunky machine called a microfilm reader with a crank. And you would crank it, and the pages would go by one at a time. And you'd have to read every single page to see what's in it. So luckily, these newspapers were one page long, or I'd still be there going blind right now. So that's how I got the history of the tunnel that I've been telling you. It came out of these old newspaper articles. So it got to be really frustrating because here was the interesting history of this place, but nobody could really tell me if it was here or not. So one of the librarians said to me, hey, you know, why don't you go ask the experts? They probably know all about that place, and they could put this whole thing to bed, and you can go back to Pratt and Kodak. So I said, okay, it sounds like a good idea. So I went to see the first expert. The first expert I went to see was the guy who was the founder of the Transit Museum. So I said to him, hey, what's up with this tunnel under Atlantic Avenue? So he says to me, don't waste your time. I guarantee to you 100% there's nothing there. Don't waste any more of your time on this. It's stupid. And I'm like, why? And he says to me, well, when I was your age, I went looking for it, and there was nothing there. So I said, hold on a minute. There's something wrong with your logic stream. What you just said to me is not that there's no tunnel, and here's why. What you just said is that you can't find it, and because you can't find it, that means it doesn't exist. And he says to me, yeah, that's right. So I said, no. Okay, so then I went to see other experts who were all very high-level engineers from different city agencies, whose names will remain anonymous until my book comes out. So the next guy I went to see said to me, you can't go in that tunnel. And I'm like, why? And he says, if there's a tunnel there, it's filled up with exploding gas. And as soon as you touch that tunnel, it's going to explode and blow up the whole street. So he's actually quoted in the New York Times telling me this. If anybody wants to go and dig back to 1981, you can find the story where he actually says this. So then I went to another expert, and he says to me, you can't go in that tunnel. And I'm like, why? And he says to me, because it's going to be filled up with poison gas. So I said, okay. I went to the next expert. He says to me, you can't go in that tunnel. And I'm like, why? And he says to me, because if it's there, it's going to be filled up with water 14 feet deep. And then I went to one last expert. And after this expert, this last one, I said, no more experts. I'm going to go and become my own expert now and find out what's really happening. And what did this guy say to me? He said to me, you can't go in that tunnel because there's 5-foot rats inside and they will eat you. So I actually have paperwork on the city's stationery from the early 1980s that says don't look for the tunnel because the street's going to explode, you're going to get killed by poison gas, you're going to drown, and you're going to be eaten by rats. Why they didn't say alligators were down here, I don't know. So after this, I said, okay, no more experts. I'm going to go and figure this out for myself. So it's frustrating because here's this interesting history, but no tunnel. So now pure luck comes in. A lot of times when you discover something, there's pure luck that just gets involved. And that's the only way you can get the solution to it, is just by luck. So my piece of luck came when I went to a bookstore on 6th Avenue and 8th Street. So I went there to buy somebody a birthday present. So I'm walking through the shelves, and I bump into a book that's half hanging out, and I pick it up, and it says Old Brooklyn Heights by Clay Lancaster. So I'm thumbing through this book, and I get towards the front of it, and it says, Brooklyn has the world's oldest subway under Atlantic Avenue. And then it says, see file reference number so-and-so at the Long Island Historical Society. So the next day, I went down to the Long Island Historical Society, or should I say the Brooklyn Historical Society, with this book, and I went to the librarian, and I said, can I see the folder on the Atlantic Avenue tunnel? And she's like, the what? I said, well, can you find it using this folder number from this book? And she goes, yeah. So she comes out with the folder, and I open it up, and then there's the original invitation to the opening of the tunnel from 1844, and then there's a drawing of it from 1846, and then there's a piece of plain paper that has pencil writing on it. And it says Brooklyn Eagle, July 23rd, 1911. So I went and pulled this up on the microfilm, and sure enough, there was a full-page article entitled "Brooklyn Has the World's Oldest Subway." And whoever wrote this article had this tunnel down dead cold in the first paragraph. It says, "No place else in the country is there a spot where there's so many old inhabitants' tales and rumors and folklore the way this tunnel has." And this he's completely right about, because here we are on Saturday afternoon telling all these stories, right? So he was completely right. And then he goes on to say in the first paragraph that when they closed off the tunnel, they sealed up a wood-burning locomotive behind the wall near Columbia Street. And this actually turns out to have some reality behind it. But again, because of time constraints, I can't get into it now. But if you go to brooklynrail.net and go to the bottom of the tunnel page, you'll see why.